Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar. This webinar will be talking about transferring your SEVIS record to UC San Diego. So for those students who are interested in learning more about this process, thanks for being here today. My name is Pauline de Guzman, and I'm the manager of student services here at ISPO. I see some familiar names in our attendees list, so it's nice to see some of you again. For those of you who we are meeting for the first time, or if this is your first pre-arrival webinar with ISPO, welcome. So before we begin, first, you are on listen-only mode. You can hear us, but we cannot hear you. Second, we are recording. So if you miss any part of this webinar or have any questions and would like to review it, the recording will be available at iwebinars.ucsd.edu. And lastly, please do ask questions. I have my wonderful colleagues, Lisa Swid and Shelley Taskin, who are international student advisors, who will be able to answer questions through the Q&A feature chat below. So please do utilize the Q&A toolbox to ask questions. If after this webinar you do have any follow-up questions, you can always find different ways to contact an ISPO advisor by visiting icontact.ucsd.edu. So for today's goals, I'd like for us to understand the SEVIS transfer process and also understand your own timeline. It might look different for each student, and so knowing your own key dates and dates to take action is really important. And then also understanding how to request your SEVIS record to be transferred to UC San Diego using ISPO's iPortal. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce my colleague Lisa Swid to talk more about what the SEVIS transfer is, what does it mean to transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego, and a little bit more about eligibility.
Great, thank you, Pauline. So yeah, what is a SEVIS transfer? So it is when an F1 student transfers their SEVIS record from one institution to another. So this means that your SEVIS number will remain the same when you switch from one school to the new one. So for example, if you attended a high school in the United States, or perhaps you pursued your undergraduate degree in the United States, or you're on OPT in F1 status, with a SEVIS form I-20, then you can request that your school transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego by setting a release date of your record. And then again, you would be able to maintain the same SEVIS ID on the I-20 that UCSD issues to you. So can you go to the next slide? So how do you know if you're eligible for a SEVIS transfer? So first, you will want to check when was the last date of enrollment, or what is the last date of your OPT if you're on optional practical training. The last date of your enrollment or your OPT end date must be no more than 152 days from the start date of your new school. So for example, if you're completing your program of study or your OPT is going to end in June of this year, then you will have no problem at all transferring your SEVIS record to UC San Diego, because the start date at UC San Diego for fall quarter is September 20th, 2021, which is less than 152 days from when you completed your previous program. Another eligibility requirement is that your SEVIS record must be in active status in order for your record to be transferred. So if your record was terminated or was completed or canceled, then you're not eligible to have your SEVIS record transferred. And then lastly, your record must have been released before your grace period ends. If your record was transferred after your grace period, then your SEVIS record is not active, and then it's not possible for it to be transferred. So let's take a look at how you're going to find your program end date. Pauline, did you want to cover this slide?
Sure, yeah, I can go into this. So thank you, Lisa, for talking about transfer and eligibility. So as Lisa mentioned, in order to assess if you are eligible to transfer your SEVIS record from your current institution to UC San Diego, you need to determine, right, when does the 5-month or 152 days start? So if you're currently enrolled at your institution now, let's say you are currently attending high school or maybe pursuing your undergraduate studies, you want to look at your Form I-20 and you want to see what is the program end date listed on your most recently issued Form I-20. Now, something to note is sometimes this is not always accurate, right? Sometimes your program end date that you might have on your most recently issued I-20 says, June 30th of 2022, that's next year, but you're planning to graduate early. You took some extra classes, perhaps, and now you're able to graduate 2 or 3 quarters early. So you would always just note the last date of enrollment at your current school, okay? If you're currently on OPT, then you want to look at your EAD card. And on your EAD card, it will have your approved OPT start date and end date. So the last date of your approved OPT, if you're currently on OPT, can be where your 5-month period will start. If you request to transfer your SEVIS record earlier or before you actually end the approved OPT period, then it will start from when you request your SEVIS record to be released to us. So I know these are all new terms: SEVIS record release date, when is your I-20 or SEVIS record released to UC San Diego. So we'll go over this in more detail in this session. Okay, and I'd like to encourage everybody to, yes, please use the SEVIS or the Q&A tool. Okay, so there's a quick question in the Q&A. Am I allowed to transfer my SEVIS record before, or do I have to wait until after I graduate or complete my current program of study? So that's a really good question. Let's look into timeline and eligibility for each case, if you're currently enrolled or if you're currently on OPT. So one thing to understand first when you're talking about release date, or when UC San Diego will have access to your SEVIS record and when we'll be able to issue you an I-20 using that same SEVIS ID number, is to basically understand your grace period and also understand when you will choose a SEVIS release date. So if you're currently enrolled at your current institution now, so let's say you're in high school, you want to note when is your last date of enrollment. Okay. After that last date of enrollment, you will automatically enter what's called your grace period. And for F1 students, this is a period of 60 days. The grace period is a time for you after you complete your program to figure out, okay, what am I going to do next? What are my next steps? Now, if you do not take any action at the end of your grace period, or if you depart the US at the end of your grace period, your I-20 will automatically cancel. This means your SEVIS record and your F1 status will also automatically complete, not cancel. This means essentially that you do not hold F1 status here in the US, and hopefully by the end of your grace period, you have planned to depart the US. Now, if you are on OPT, you're currently on optional practical training, you also have a 60-day grace period at the end of your approved OPT. Something that I want to point out is you are only eligible for a 60-day grace period after the last day of approved OPT. Okay, if you are going to stop OPT early, let's say, your last day of approved OPT as listed on your EAD card is August 1st, but you would like to transfer your I-20 and SEVIS record to UCSD on June 1st. You are not eligible for a 60-day grace period starting from June 1st. You are only eligible for a grace period upon completion of OPT. It's a really important note because it does impact your timeline. Okay, again, if you don't take any action during approved OPT or during the end of before the end of your grace period, your status will automatically complete. So let's look at some options that you can take during your grace period. During your 60-day grace period, you can apply for and or begin working on post-completion OPT. You can also start a new program at your current institution, which is also known as changing degree level. You can start a new program at a new school. And if, again, as Lisa mentioned, if it's within 152 days of your last date of enrollment or OPT at your current school, you may be eligible to transfer your SEVIS record to the new school. You can also depart the US or change visa status. So today we're going to go in depth regarding transfer eligibility if you are starting a new program here at UC San Diego. So again, this 5-month rule comes into play quite often when assessing eligibility for transfer, right? Again, you need to keep in mind this 5-month rule when looking at eligibility for SEVIS transfer based on last date of enrollment or last date of authorized OPT. So something I want to go over before we go into timeline, individual timeline, is the SEVIS transfer process. A lot of students think, okay, I've accepted my admission to UC San Diego. This whole thing is now automatic. My SEVIS record and my I-20 will automatically just fly to UCSD's computer. That is definitely not the case. The SEVIS transfer process requires close coordination between the student, so you, our institution, UC San Diego, and primarily our office, the International Students and Programs Office, and also your current institution. So all three of us do need to coordinate and make sure that this process does go smoothly. There are 4 main steps here in the SEVIS transfer process. The first is to determine eligibility. So is your I-20 in good standing? Are you eligible for a SEVIS transfer based on the 5-month window, right? Are you completing your enrollment or OPT within 5 months of your fall quarter or perhaps summer quarter start date here at UC San Diego? Something I want to note is there may be students who have completed their program of study in winter. So maybe like March 20th at their current institution, in which case they would not be eligible to transfer their I-20 for a fall quarter start date at UC San Diego, right? Because there's more than a 5-month or 152-day gap. So step 1, determine eligibility. Step 2, you need to coordinate with your current school and talk to your DSO or your international student office at your current school. And you need to ask them, what's the process in which I can request my current institution now to transfer my SEVIS record and my Form I-20 to UC San Diego? What does that process look like? They may ask you to fill out a couple of forms, show maybe your acceptance letter from UC San Diego, a couple of other things. So you want to ask them, what is their process? And then you also want to inform them of when they are to release your SEVIS record and your I-20 to UC San Diego. You need to tell them when to do that. And we'll talk about what an ideal date is to choose for that SEVIS release date, or also known as the date of when they're going to give UC San Diego your SEVIS record. Okay, but knowing that process, because it requires them to do something on their end, is really important. So once you've determined you're eligible, once you've talked to your current institution and they've released your SEVIS record to UC San Diego, you will then move on to step 3, requesting your Form I-20 from UC San Diego. Lisa will go in detail regarding how to request this I-20, what it looks like in iPortal, and what the form will ask you. However, you do need to request the I-20 from us, okay? We'll ask you to provide some details regarding your transfer. And then once we process your I-20, then you will receive your I-20 from UC San Diego. You'll check that I-20 to make sure it has the same SEVIS ID number that you received at your previous institution. So this then completes the SEVIS transfer process. So as you can see, there's quite a bit of coordination that is required. Okay, so now we're going to look at your individual timelines. And if you're currently enrolled or if you're currently on OPT, this may look different for you. So please do ask clarifying questions. Okay, if currently enrolled, or if you're currently in your 60-day grace period, as you can see here, you're currently enrolled in courses. Okay, from the last date of enrollment to the start date of your new program here at UC San Diego. So if you are starting your program in the fall quarter will begin on September 20th here for fall of 2021. You have to make sure that there is no more than 152 days or 5 months from last date of enrollment to our fall quarter start date. Now, if you are going to be transferring your SEVIS record to us, just note that you do need to choose a SEVIS release date. And again, this is when your current institution will provide your SEVIS release and provide or transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego. You will choose this date. So it's ideally going to be within your grace period, but it must be before the end of your grace period. So if your last date of enrollment at your current institution is on June 11th, then you can choose a release date on June 12th or anywhere within your 60-day grace period. Okay. Once your SEVIS record is released to UC San Diego, so on your SEVIS release date, you may remain in the US. You do not need to depart the US. Okay. You may remain in the US upon your SEVIS release date and await your program to start in the fall quarter. During the pending transfer period, which is reflected here in this teal box, you can remain in the US, and there are a couple of other things that you may be eligible to do, and we'll go over that at the end. Okay. So if you're currently on OPT, and I know we have quite a few students who are joining us in the fall quarter after completion of their current OPT, your timeline is similar, right? You also do need to choose a SEVIS release date. Ideally, if you're going to complete your OPT period, you can choose a SEVIS release date within your 60-day grace period as well. You will need to inform your institution of the SEVIS release date. And then likewise, you may remain in the US during that transfer pending period. There cannot be more than 152 days or 5 months between last date of OPT to our start date here in the fall quarter. So many students will actually be ending their OPT early in order to join us in the fall quarter. So if you are going to be ending OPT early before the current OPT end date listed on your EAD card, you are able to request that your school release your SEVIS record to UC San Diego during your approved OPT period. Just something to note is it has to be, again, less than 5 months from the date of your SEVIS release to our start in the fall. And also, if you are currently on OPT and you're working on that SEVIS release date, OPT authorization automatically stops, okay? So many students will try to strategically time their SEVIS release date, if they're currently on OPT, as close as possible to their new program start date here at UC San Diego so that they can maximize the amount of time they have to work on OPT. You can work with your current institution and your DSO to figure out this timeline for you. But essentially, you just note that if you are planning to transfer your SEVIS record during your OPT period, OPT stops on your SEVIS release date. And again, you may remain in the US during the transfer pending period once you've released your SEVIS record to UC San Diego. Okay, again, please do use the Q&A feature to ask for any clarifying questions. I'm happy to clarify anything here that we've gone over. Now, choosing a release date, as we've just gone over, depends on you and your situation. So if you're enrolled, ideally, you want to choose a release date after your program end date. So if you're currently in high school now and you're completing your program, let's say on June 7th, you probably want to choose a release date in your grace period, so June 8th within the next 60 days. If you're currently on OPT, again, it's up to you when you'd like to choose your SEVIS release date, perhaps during your approved OPT or in your F1 grace period. But just to note that OPT stops on your SEVIS release date. Okay. So I have a great question in the chat, and I'd like to actually answer this live. A student has already initiated the SEVIS transfer process, and they have chosen a release date of May 1st. And in iPortal, their status of their application, their I-20 request, says that it is in preliminary approval. So another detail is when you request your I-20 from ISPO, we cannot actually issue you an I-20 until that SEVIS release date. Okay, because we don't have an I-20 to issue because your record has not been released to us. So if you request a transfer today on May 6th and your SEVIS release date is not until August 1st, note that we likely will place your application in preliminary approval, which basically means we have all the information we need, but we're waiting for your release date to be current so that we can actually issue you an I-20. The processing time may vary from your release date. So if you chose a release date of, let's say, August 1st, we'll probably issue it within the next week or so after that release date. But just to note that that's why your application might be sitting in preliminary approval for quite some time. Essentially, we cannot do anything until your SEVIS release date. Okay. Okay, so we've gone over the transfer timeline in detail. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it to back to Lisa to kind of go over more about step 3, right? Transferring, once your SEVIS record is transferred to UC San Diego, how do you request your I-20 from UC San Diego?
Perfect. Thank you, Pauline, for going into such great detail in outlining the transfer process. So how are you going to request your I-20? So first step would be to visit iportal.ucsd.edu, and you would click on Service to find the request type called New Admit I-20 or DS-2019 Request. And the form will lead you through a series of questions to determine whether or not you are eligible for a SEVIS transfer. If you're eligible, you will land on this question here. It asks you, do you plan on transferring your current SEVIS record from your current institution to UC San Diego? So you would want to answer yes. I confirm I would like to transfer my SEVIS record from my current institution to UC San Diego. Once you answer yes, then the form will then ask for relevant information such as the name of your current school, whether you're on OPT, what your SEVIS ID is, and so forth. You will also be asked to indicate when you want your SEVIS record, or when you've scheduled your SEVIS record to be released to UC San Diego. And that gives us the information that we need in terms of when we're going to actually process your transfer I-20. So as Pauline had mentioned previously, sometimes your application might be put in preliminary approval if the record release date is set to a time in the future. So if it's not going to be released until August 1st, then we put it in preliminary approval and we'll process it once the record is released to us. Okay, so Pauline alluded to this earlier, but know that the transfer process is not automatic. So again, you will need to contact your current school and ask them to actually transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego. We are not able to process the transfer I-20 unless your previous school has transferred your SEVIS record to us. If, for example, you have completed your iPortal application, everything is there, and then we go in to process your transfer I-20, we will notice that your record has not been transferred to us, and then we will set your iPortal application to incomplete. You will receive notice in your application explaining that you need to contact your current school, your record has not been released, and once, then you can resubmit your application. So again, please coordinate with your current school to determine when your record will be released to us. That way, when we process your application in iPortal, we're able to move forward with issuing a transfer I-20. Okay, let's see. So make sure, again, so this is all information that helps you to plan ahead and make sure that the transfer process is smooth. Once you receive the transfer I-20 from UC San Diego, note that you are expected to enroll full-time on the program start date that's listed on your Form I-20. You are required to report any changes to our office through iPortal to maintain your Form I-20 and your F1 status. You are able to apply for on-campus employment during the transfer period. You can also enroll in courses. You can travel and re-enter the United States during the transfer period. If you are a brand new student and you're not transferring, then you can enter the United States 30 days before the program start date. However, as a transfer, that rule does not apply to you. So you can travel and re-enter during the transfer period. And then also you can use this transfer I-20 to apply for an F1 visa if you are abroad, or if you need to renew your visa.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. So we've gone over really the 4 steps of the SEVIS transfer process, right? First, determine eligibility. Second, talk to your current institution and ask them to transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego. Third, request your I-20 from UC San Diego. And then fourth, receive that I-20 and maintain it. So Lisa just went over all of the possibilities or options that you can do while you're waiting for once you've received your I-20 from UC San Diego, while you're waiting for your program to start in the fall. Something that I want to highlight here is you may travel and re-enter during the pending transfer period. So once you've released your SEVIS record to UC San Diego, once we've issued you an I-20 and you're sitting and waiting basically for your program to start, you can do all of these things, including travel. You're not subject to the 30-day rule, which means you can enter the US even earlier than 30 days before the program start date listed on your I-20. Now, because of the 2021-2022 academic year's SEVP guidance, there are some important things to note regarding travel. Now, SEVP and the most recently released SEVP guidance, they require enrollment in at least one in-person or hybrid course in order to seek entry into the US. So if you're currently in the US now and you request to transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego, we are able to issue you a Form I-20. However, if you plan to go home, let's say for summer vacation, you want to go home for the summer, visit family, and re-enter the US before the fall quarter begins, note that for fall quarter, you must have at least one in-person or hybrid course in order to seek entry into the US. Okay. Now, the activation of your Form I-20. International students are required to report to their institution either through electronic means or begin attending on-campus courses. We can go over the activation process in more detail at a different time. However, the current SEVP guidance does not permit schools to activate that Form I-20 unless you are going to be physically present in the US. So for any reason, if you do travel over the summer and let's say you intend to arrive in the fall quarter, but for some reason you are not able to physically arrive, you may begin your program remotely. You may enroll in all online courses for the fall quarter. However, because we are not able to activate your Form I-20 because you did not physically enter the US, it will automatically cancel. Okay, so once your SEVIS record that was transferred to us cancels, you'll need to request a new I-20 in order to seek entry for the next quarter. Now, when we issue you a new I-20, let's say for winter of 2022, reflecting when you will seek entry into the US, that I-20 will have a new SEVIS ID number. This is really important to note because when you do receive a new SEVIS ID number from UC San Diego, there are a couple of things that you'll need to do. The first is you'll need to pay a new I-901 fee to activate that new SEVIS ID and SEVIS I-20. The second thing is you may require a new or updated visa to enter the US. Now, this is usually not the case if you have a valid F1 visa Even if inside of the F1 visa, there's a different SEVIS ID number listed, you should still be able to use that valid F1 visa to enter the US, even if we issue you an I-20 with a new SEVIS number. However, you can call your US embassy to check for requirements for entry based on your current visa. And then another thing is the clock restarts when it comes to employment eligibility. So in order to begin any type of off-campus work during your program of study, you must first wait 3 quarters on this new SEVIS number before you can apply for any type of practical training through curricular practical training, also known as CPT, or optional practical training, also known as OPT. More information on what it means to receive a new SEVIS ID number can be found on inewstudents.ucsd.edu. And we go into other implications in great detail, but these are the 3 main ones. Okay, so as we end here and go into our Q&A session, just a reminder that this webinar recording will be available at iwebinars.ucsd.edu. You can always visit our website for new students at inewstudent.ucsd.edu. And for different ways to contact an advisor, please visit icontact.ucsd.edu. All right, we have some really great questions in the chat. So I'd like to take this time now to enter Q&A. So the first question here is, what are the advantages of transferring your SEVIS record as compared to just requesting a new I-20 with a new SEVIS number? It's a really great question. Lisa, feel free to add anything to my response. However, the advantages of transferring your SEVIS record is one, when you transfer that SEVIS record from one institution to another, you will retain the same SEVIS ID number. When you retain the same SEVIS ID number, you do not need to pay a new I-901 fee to activate that I-20. Another thing that it allows you to do is it allows you to remain in the US during the transfer period. So if you are to request a new SEVIS record, you're currently in the US now, and you would like to request a new SEVIS record instead of transfer your SEVIS record, you are required to depart the US. You may not remain in the US. In order to activate the new I-20 with the new SEVIS number, then you need to depart the US and seek entry, okay? You cannot stay in the US with a new SEVIS number. You can only stay in the US if you are transferring that SEVIS record. Another advantage is if you are transferring your SEVIS record, you're able to remain in the US and enroll in classes, right, in the summer before you start your program in the fall. You're also able to work on campus and seek on-campus employment. Another great advantage is you can use the time spent at your previous institution if you were studying at a degree level program, or basically any program that is a non-language training program, to count towards the 1 academic year requirement for off-campus practical training at your new program here at UC San Diego. So there are a lot of great advantages to transferring your SEVIS record, but I think the question here is, are you eligible? So that's usually the biggest question. Okay. Okay, so another great question. Let's see. Another great question. Not sure if I missed it, but is it possible to transfer your SEVIS record during a pending OPT period? So you've already applied for OPT at your current institution, and it's still pending. It has not yet been approved by US Immigration. So this is a good question. And because your current institution is the one who holds your SEVIS record, this is a question really for them in terms of eligibility to transfer your SEVIS record out to UC San Diego. If your current institution allows that you transfer your SEVIS record to UC San Diego during the pending period where you're waiting for OPT, yes, UC San Diego will allow the SEVIS transfer, and we will be able to issue an I-20 in this circumstance. However, you want to check with your current institution regarding their advice for your timeline. Let's see. These are really great questions. Okay, how long after UC San Diego receives the SEVIS record can we expect to receive the I-20 mailed to an international location? So during the for the remainder of the pandemic, again, ISPO will be issuing electronic documents. So we will not be mailing your physical Form I-20. It will be available for download in the iPortal. Once your SEVIS record is released to ISPO, we usually will allow for processing time. It's usually no more than, I would say a week to 10 business days, but really once your SEVIS record is released to us, we cannot take action. And so usually processing time will vary from the release date. Okay. Okay, so this question, if I'm transferring my SEVIS record, will I also be required to wait 3/4 period before applying for new OPT? Yes, in order to apply for optional practical training, which is essentially eligibility to apply for post-completion optional practical training, it's authorization to work after completion of your program of study. We do recommend that you wait 3/4. And essentially most programs here at UC San Diego are at least 3/4. So you'll enroll in 3/4 before you apply for OPT. Okay, let's see. I am transferring my SEVIS record. My program starts on August 23rd, and I have remote classes, but I expect to have in-person classes eventually. I have a valid F1 visa. Can I travel outside the US before my program start date? So yes, if you have a valid F1 visa, right, and your program starts on August 23rd, what I would recommend first is that you wait for your SEVIS record to be transferred to UC San Diego and that you obtain an I-20 from UC San Diego showing that your program will start on August 23rd. Once you do depart the US, if you have a valid F1 visa, you are able to seek entry into the US for your August 23rd program start date, but just note you do need to have an in-person course that does begin on August 23rd, in-person or hybrid course that starts on August 23rd. And then also for travelers, just keep in mind any travel restrictions in place, depending on current country that you're located in. Okay, we have another question regarding someone who's currently on OPT and hoping to transfer their SEVIS record. I'm currently on OPT and I'd like to continue working for as long as possible before transferring my SEVIS record. How long does it usually take to transfer the SEVIS record? It's a good question. So as Lisa mentioned earlier, we cannot take action on your I-20 until your SEVIS record release date. And your institution can actually set a future SEVIS release date for you. So today on May 6th, you can actually talk to your institution and just say, hello, school, I'd like to transfer my SEVIS record on August 21st. Okay, a couple days before my program starts, let's say on August 23rd. So today, your current institution can actually set a future SEVIS release date of August 21st. And this is all electronic. They basically go into their computer, they set a release date of August 21st, and you'll just know that your OPT will end on August 21st. On August 21st, that same day, we will be able to issue you an I-20. However, of course, due to processing time, it might be a little bit after August 21st, but that SEVIS transfer process electronically is instantaneous. So there's no lag time between the date that your current institution, your current institution releases your SEVIS record to when UC San Diego receives it. There is no lag time, but there might be some time in which your SEVIS record is released to us, but it takes some time for us to issue the actual I-20. And yes, you can choose a SEVIS release date if you want to maximize your OPT period all the way, towards the beginning, all the way to the beginning of your program start date. But it should essentially be before your program starts. Okay. So it looks like we have reached the end of our questions. We have a few more minutes here, so I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have for me or any of the information that